You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old-time and bluegrass music. The New Lost City Ramblers called it one of the most popular of the breakdown tunes, and it's a piece that's been widespread throughout the South and Southwest in both instrumental and song versions as well. It's been covered by literally hundreds of old-time and bluegrass bands throughout the years. So stick around because we're going to explore some of the history behind this tune, and I'll share with you folks some of the very first recordings of Eyed Susie and the people behind them. And we'll even listen to some other legendary recordings as played throughout the decades. So let's dive in.
Love my craving, love my party, love my sweetheart, baby body.
You're listening to what might be the earliest recording of Eyed Susie by Gid Tanner and Riley Puckett. Gid was a founding member of the Skillet Lickers, one of the most popular and enduring string bands of the 1920s and 30s. James Gideon Gid Tanner was born in 1885 in Thomas Bridge, about 45 miles east of Atlanta. He spent most of his adult life in Gwinnett County, where he made a living raising chickens. He learned to play the fiddle at the age of 14 and eventually became known throughout the local area for his talent. As a young man, he was a regular participant at the Georgia Old-Time Fiddlers conventions, which was held annually in Atlanta between 1913 and 1935. Together with his rival, fiddling John Carson, what one of them didn't win, the other usually would. In 1928, when he was 43 years old, he won the state fiddling championship. And by this time, Tanner had gained a reputation as a crowd pleaser and a comedian, entertaining audiences with his repertoire of off-the-wall stage antics. His performance style belonged much to that older entertainment tradition of the minstrel and old-time medicine shows. He would commonly wear funny hats while cracking jokes and singing crazy songs about moonshine and chin whiskers. He could sing with both a deep bass and a high falsetto, and he was known to throw his head back so far that he looked like he was decapitated. He could also turn it around almost completely like an owl. Or sometimes he would thrust out his lower lip like some sort of strange fish. Tanner allegedly knew the words and music to more than 2,000 songs. The favorite among his audiences was a song entitled I'm Satisfied, which he sang in alternating falsetto and bass registers. When Tanner sang this song at the Fiddlers conventions, newspapers reported that he, quote, brought the house down. And usually he would be forced to repeat the song several times before the audience would let him leave the stage. So when Columbia Records scout Frank Walker approached Tanner to make some records in New York in 1924, it was partly in response to the success of fiddling John Carson's records, which were released by the OK label and had just taken the recording industry by surprise, revealing the fact that there was money to be made from old-time string band music. Columbia Records soon recognized the demand for rural white musicians, a market they had already tapped with their successful blues releases. And Gid Tanner kind of happened to be at the right place at the right time. Columbia focused on the Atlanta area, where the radio station WSB had been broadcasting live performances since 1922. So in March of 1924, Tanner made his way to New York, accompanied by his friend, the blind guitarist Riley Puckett. And Puckett is a name that's pretty much legendary among old-time guitar players, who copy his style to this day. Like Gid Tanner, Riley Puckett was also known as a fixture of the Georgia Old-Time Fiddlers conventions. He was born George Riley Puckett in 1894 in Dallas, Georgia, near Alpharetta. Although at birth he did have the ability to see, during his infancy, a medical treatment using lead acetate had misfired and left him permanently blind. He went on to attend the Macon School for the Blind, where he learned to read Braille and to play the piano. When he was a teenager, he taught himself to play banjo, and in time he became a contest winner on this instrument. But he also picked up the guitar and would eventually develop this unique dramatic style of playing bass note runs to bridge the chord changes of a song. This style had this dynamic and rhythmic pulse behind the fiddle, which is still emulated to this day. But at the time, Riley was known more for his singing voice than his guitar playing, which eventually attracted the attention of audiences at the regional fiddling contests in Georgia. Newspaper reporters covering these events referred to Riley as, quote, the Bald Mountain Caruso, a reference to Enrico Caruso, the iconic Italian opera superstar of the time. For several years, Puckett played and sang with the Atlanta-based string band called the Hometown Boys, and in September of 1922, Riley and the band made their debut on Atlanta's 6-month-old radio station, WSB, where they would prove to be one of the station's most popular acts until the station went off the air 4 years later in 1926. Which brings us back to those 2 days in March of 1924, when Gid Tanner and Riley Puckett would cut 12 songs and tunes for the Columbia Phonograph Company. The two men would be the first country music artists to record for that label. These recording sessions yielded vocal selections by Puckett and fiddle tunes by Tanner. One of Puckett's songs, Rock All Our Babies to Sleep, established him as probably the first country music artist to ever yodel on records. And on March 8th, the two would be the first ever to make a commercial recording of Black Eyed Susie. Tanner's records were a hit, and not too long afterwards, the producer, Frank Walker, called Tanner and Puckett back to the studio again in 1926. But this time, the duo would be joined with some other musicians that Walker had helped gather up together for the sole purpose of making even more commercial records. In addition to Gid and Riley, this lineup would include the Georgia auto mechanic, Clayton McMitchen, who played an even meaner fiddle than Gid, along with the Georgia banjo and harmonica player by the name of Fate Norris. Altogether, this group would be billed the enduring name of Gid Tanner and his Skillet Lickers. Eventually, the Skillet Lickers would include a revolving cast of Georgia musicians, but this supergroup would record some of the most popular string band music of the time. But it wasn't all roses, as tensions within the band would arise early on. McMitchen, who played lead fiddle, didn't care too much for the band's comedy numbers. McMitchen was more interested in turning the old-time fiddle band into more of an up-to-the-minute swing group, capable of delivering country and pop songs. McMitchen playing fiddle while Gid Tanner chanted Old MacDonald Had a Farm was not really his idea of a good time. It was an uneasy collaboration of talents between the two men, but for a while it worked. The Skillet Lickers were highly successful and made enough money, session fees alone netted the principal members about $1,000 a year, to keep the team working together more or less friendly throughout the heyday of hillbilly recordings in the late 20s and early 30s. The Skillet Lickers would eventually disband for a time in 1931 during the Great Depression, but not before making another recording of Black Eyed Susie in 1928. This cut has a bit more power and drive than Gid's original recording with Puckett 4 years earlier. McMitchen's great fiddling takes it to the next level, above Gid's version, but you can still make out Gid's falsetto throughout, and of course, once again, Riley's guitar work is just so good and cuts so clear on this recording.
Some got Susie, I went home a little black-eyed Susie.
Black Eyed Susie would continue to be recorded by a number of artists during the 1920s, notably with Al Hopkins and his Knucklebusters, J.P. Nestor, and Doc Roberts, all who recorded the tune in the same year of 1927. Doc Roberts, who hailed from Kentucky, is an interesting and unique case because during the 1920s and 30s, fiddlers in Kentucky who wanted to record their music found themselves at a bit of a disadvantage. The commercial record companies who eagerly set up temporary studios in states like Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas, for some reason ignored the bluegrass state. During the golden age of old time music, the big record companies only scheduled two field sessions in Kentucky, one being a 1928 session in Ashland by the Brunswick label, which mostly attracted acts from West Virginia, and the second one being a 1930 session in Louisville by the Victor label, which didn't even attempt to attract any local talent from that area, merely set up to record the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers. The Kentucky fiddlers who wanted to record during this time generally had to go north to Indiana or Wisconsin. And even these record companies over there had their own issues, as most of these records were poorly recorded, cheaply made, and not well distributed at all. In fact, some of the records of this time, most of them issued by Gannett Records, sold very few copies, and the ones that did sell wore out quickly due to their poor quality. As a result, a number of them have just disappeared over time and are just lost forever. It's kind of a tragedy for fans and scholars of Kentucky old time music since the state had one of the strongest and most complex fiddling traditions in the entire South. But the Kentucky fiddler who best survived this handicap was Doc Roberts. Roberts succeeded in recording more commercial sides than any other fiddler in the state. He recorded over 80 solos and many more as an accompanist. In terms of raw talent, Roberts has been considered by many to be at the same level of talent as, say, an Arthur Smith or Clayton McMitchin. But Roberts was never as well known or influential as these other fiddlers. One reason being that many of his recordings were actually issued under someone else's name. When he was 13, Doc spent one semester attending this school in nearby Berea, but dropped out when he was 16 years old, which was when he got married. Doc would eventually go on to raise 11 children. He earned his money sharecropping corn and tobacco. While his main concern was working to earn enough money for his large family, he still found time to play music. In later interviews, Roberts recalled how he would spend many hours at night playing music and chatting with a neighbor, Dennis Taylor. They talked a lot about the new old-time string band records that were just hitting the market. The talk eventually developed into action when the two teamed up and formed a band. And they were pretty good because they were able to land a recording deal with the Gannett label in Indiana. Doc would eventually record hundreds of records from the late 20s to the mid 30s, including this legendary recording of Black Eyed Susie in 1927. You have to love Doc's fiddling. He was a superb technician. His playing style has this rich, full tone and these long, flowing lines. He also had this subtle sense of timing that was so characteristic of Kentucky players from this time. About a decade after our last recording, we find another important version of Black Eyed Susie performed by another legendary Kentucky fiddler, Luther Strong. Strong was born in 1892 in Perry County, Kentucky, about 100 miles from Lexington. He began fiddling when he was a boy, and like most of his contemporaries and those before him, had no access to radio or records during his formative years. As a youth, he played dance tunes for square dances, but also developed some unique tunes that were meant for just listening. And you can listen to my video on Glory in the Meeting House for more info on one of those. But Strong never made his living from music. He moved frequently throughout the area looking for work variously as a blacksmith, carpenter, mason, factory worker, and coal miner. One of his sons even remembers having to attend 17 different schools before graduating high school. Strong never recorded commercially, but we have some field recordings of Luther's playing thanks to this man, Alan Lomax. When Lomax was traveling in Kentucky looking for fiddlers, he was given a tip to track down Luther. But when he found his house, he was told that the fiddler wasn't there. He had just been arrested and thrown in jail for public drunkenness. So Lomax went to the jail and bailed him out. But Luther was severely hungover at the time, and he didn't even have a fiddle. But he agreed to make some recordings if Alan could give him a drink to take off the edge. Alan left Luther in his makeshift recording studio at the hotel in Hazard, where he was staying. He returned soon after with a bottle of whiskey and a fiddle he had secured from somewhere. Although Luther wasn't feeling his best and had to play on a borrowed fiddle, when Lomax turned on his recorder, Luther played some of the finest Kentucky fiddling that had ever been made. So, here's Luther Strong's 1937 legendary recording of Black-Eyed Susie, and it's just wonderful. While Lomax called this number a square dancing tune, Luther plays it with this haunting, almost eerie sound. And speaking of haunting versions, I can't leave out another legendary recording of the tune, this time performed by the banjo player Roscoe Holcomb. While the Skillet Lickers and other bands from the 20s and 30s recorded this tune with more of a polished up and smooth style, Roscoe's version is a bit rougher, and his vocals just cut through. It's a ragged and soulful sound, straight from the mountains and hollers of Kentucky. Bob Dylan said that Holcomb's singing carried, quote, a certain untamed sense of control, and Eric Clapton reportedly called him his favorite country musician ever. So here's Holcomb performing Black-Eyed Susie, and while it's probably not the song that fully captures Roscoe's full vocal range, he still delivers this number with his mountain tenor, which is both razor sharp and also a bit fragile at the same time. All the while, his banjo frailing is lightning fast, and he still adds these interesting dynamics where he hits those heavy strums to help create this interesting syncopated rhythm. Black-Eyed Susie continues to be recorded and played by countless old-time musicians today, and here's a more recent and very different version performed by Brad and Ken Kolodner, along with Rachel Eddy. And this recording includes a gourd banjo and a hammered dulcimer. It's got a very cool, modern, but also old-sounding and bluesy feel to it.
All I need to make me happy, 2 little boys to call me pappy. Hey, Black-Eyed Susie, hey. Hey, Black-Eyed Susie, hey.
Of course, I won't leave out the fact that many awesome bluegrass versions of this tune exist as well. It's been recorded by a countless number of bands, most notably with the Dillards, Flatt and Scruggs, Ralph Stanley, and Doc Watson. But I think my favorite bluegrass version of all time is by Ricky Skaggs. Here's a live performance of Ricky performing the tune with his band. His version of Black-Eyed Susie just drives full throttle ahead, and it's just so much fun.
Black-Eyed Susie came to town, she wore the gingham gown. Black-Eyed Susie, Black-Eyed Susie, Black-Eyed Susie, Black-Eyed Susie, yeah.
While there are just too many good versions of this tune out there, I had to leave out a bunch. Feel free to post your favorite recording in the comments, but for now, we need to discuss the history of this piece, and this is a tune that has some older documented sources in a number of places. A couple of early references to Black-Eyed Susie turns up in Vance Randolph's collection entitled Ozark Folk Songs, published in 1948. Some passages recount how the song was performed in Arkansas, as both a fiddle breakdown and also as a play party song during the turn of the early 1900s. The tune also turns up in this publication, the Frank C. Brown Collection of North Carolina Folklore. This book is a collection of stories, songs, and folklore collected from people living in the North Carolina mountain regions from 1912 to 1943. One excerpt collected from a Thomas Smith of Watauga County in 1915 mentions Black-Eyed Susie in this area of the state, saying this, quote, "It was popular a good many years ago. I recall hearing it picked and sung by a young banjo picker nearly 30 years ago. Jews harp players of this place also used to be strong on this tune." While Smith forgot some of the verses, he was able to recall these ones, which are some of the earliest collected, and they're pretty hilarious. "Sweeter 'n sugar, 10 times sweeter, bless her soul, I could almost eat her. Fry a little meat and make me a little gravy, hug my wife and kiss my baby." This excerpt dates this version of the song back to at least the 1870s, and the tune shows up again in this book, this time from a McDowell County resident named Linnie Hawkins. She could only recall one stanza only, but it also is pretty great, and totally, of course, completely silly. "Some come drunk and some come boozy, some come a-huggin' that black-eyed Susie. Some come drunk and some come boozy, dog my buttons if I don't love Susie." And I found another early reference to Black-Eyed Susie from a collection of ex-slave interviews found in a book entitled The American Slave, Volume 5, by Ruth Thompson. It was published around 1938, but recounts some first-hand stories of African Americans around the time of the Civil War. One person she interviewed was this man, Richard Toller, who grew up as a slave in Campbell County, Virginia. As a young man, Richard tended to the cows and calves on his master's 500-acre farm. Later on in life, he spent much of his time hoeing the fields, but he also learned blacksmithing, and after emancipation, he earned his living as a smith for 36 years. After the Civil War, he bought a fiddle and became an accomplished musician, playing for white dances and at hoedowns. And his interview is also one of the earliest references to our tune. I'll paraphrase, but he recounts, quote, "After the war, I bought a fiddle, and it was a good fiddle. I used to fiddle for the white girls to dance. I just picked it up. It was a natural gift. I could still play fiddle if I had one. I used to play at our hoedowns, too. I played all those old-time songs, Soldier's Joy, Jimmy Long Josie, Arkansas Traveler, and Black-Eyed Susie." At this point, the interviewer adds that Toller began to sway, smiling inwardly as he recalled these old lyrics. "Black-eyed Susie, you look so fine. Black-eyed Susie, I think you're mine. A wonderful time we're having now. Oh, Black-eyed Susie, I believe that you're mine." And it has been suggested that the tune may in fact have been performed as early as 1850, because a song turns up in this old book from 1853 entitled 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northrop. And yes, this is the same book that was the source of the 2013 film of that same title. The book details the life of the author, who was a musician and a farmer, born and raised a free man in New York, before being kidnapped and sold into slavery in Washington City in 1841. He spent 12 years as a slave working on a plantation in Louisiana, until eventually he was rescued in 1853. Towards the end of his book, he includes this tune he used to perform, entitled Roaring River. What's interesting about this tune is that you'll notice this verse, which is the same verse we find in numerous versions of our Black-Eyed Susie. Now, whether this is an early version of Black-Eyed Susie, we'll never really know, and the verse may have just floated from one song to the other. But it is a theory for an earlier version of a song that, if correct, would suggest that our tune derived from a Southern minstrel era song from about 1850. But that's not the only song that some researchers have linked Black-Eyed Susie to. A number of people have suggested that the lyrics and melody of Black-Eyed Susie are related to another African American folk song called Green Corn. This tune was most notably performed by the legendary blues musician Leadbelly in 1939. Here's a version of Green Corn being performed by Pete Seeger at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964.
Green corn, green corn, green corn, green corn, green corn, green corn, come along, Charlie, and the green corn, don't tell Polly. Green corn, come along, Charlie, and the green corn, Molly. Wake snake, days are breaking, the beans in the pot and the whole cakes are baking. You better come soon, it's almost day. You don't come soon, I'm gonna throw it all away. Green corn,
The melody is kind of similar, and there does appear to be a fair bit of research trying to tie the two tunes together, but there's still uncertainty as to which one may have come first, or even if Black-Eyed Susie and Green Corn may have split off from an earlier unknown source. What makes Green Corn so interesting, and what some of my bluegrass listeners may have picked out, is that it also has a very strong resemblance to the classic bluegrass song Hot Corn, Cold Corn, which does appear to have derived from this tune. So, if the Green Corn theory is correct, Black-Eyed Susie may be related to this bluegrass tune as well. So we know from these early references that the tune was played in the American South from at least as early as the mid-1800s. I should quickly note that there are other versions of Black-Eyed Susie found in America as well. Some of my old-time listeners will be familiar with the Black-Eyed Susie version as collected in Pennsylvania by Samuel Baird. While it shares a similar title with our tune, the melody is very different and appears not to be related to it in any other way. But it is still played by some old-time musicians today, which is pretty cool. And I should also mention another related tune to Black-Eyed Susie that was also recorded in 1924. That same year, Kid Tanner and Riley Puckett made the first ever Black-Eyed Susie recording. It's a tune that pretty much shares an identical melody, and it was performed by one Land Norris. It was entitled Kitty Puss, but for the reason of trying to keep this channel family-friendly, I'll just leave a link to this recording in the comments if you want to listen to that one. But the question remains, where did the melody and title of Black-Eyed Susie ultimately come from? In searching for the origin of our tune, it does appear that there are numerous tunes from the British Isles and Ireland entitled Black-Eyed Susan. However, we can't look to any of them as our source for the melody, as these versions are unrelated to our piece. But the reason for the title's popularity seems to derive from the poet and dramatist, John Gay, who wrote a story in verse by this title in 1720. Music was later added to this poem a decade later. The song was eventually also included in the patriotic ballad opera Robin Hood in 1730, and this song went on to be very popular in the 1700s. Some researchers believe that all these versions of Black-Eyed Susie, including our American one, ultimately derive from this song's title. And there is something intriguing about the title, as it can suggest both a girl or woman named Susan with dark eyes, and of course, the flower of that name as well. So, while I was able to dig up a theory on the title's origin, as far as the melody goes, I'm sorry to disappoint you folks. And that wasn't my intention. You see, when I first discovered early on that the music historian Samuel Baird had in fact traced the source of Black-Eyed Susie's melody to an old number from the British Isles dating all the way back to the 1500s, I said, well, of course, I gotta do a video on this one. But it wasn't until much later that I realized that Baird's Black-Eyed Susie, the one he collected from Pennsylvania, was a completely different tune, and not even related. And try as I did, I wasn't able to dig up any earlier definitive sources from the British Isles either. So, as far as I know, the origins of this tune still remains a mystery to this day. After Gid and Riley's successful recording of Black-Eyed Susan with the full Skillet Lickers lineup in 1926, the group broke up in 1931. But Tanner retained the right to the band's name. And 3 years later, he led a new Skillet Lickers lineup at a high-spirited farewell session. Pucket was still on the team, and some of the recordings from this date did pretty amazing business. But after the glory days, Gid went back to farming. But he still remained active as an entertainer until shortly before his death in 1960. During his last years, he still performed on stage and radio and continued to enter a number of fiddlers contests, even winning his last first-place trophy at the age of 71. Gid's legacy lived on for many years after his passing. His son Gordon, who had become a respected fiddle maker, created a junior Skillet Lickers group in his father's memory. And his grandson, Phil Tanner, and Phil's son, Russell, both fiddlers, also kept the Skillet Lickers legacy alive, performing old-time Georgia string band music under this title for more than 100 years. Riley Puckett continued to perform after his last Skillet Lickers performance in 1934, playing on radio stations from West Virginia to Chicago, and cutting about 80 more recordings throughout the 30s and early 40s. He recorded a wide repertoire of tunes, everything from Tin Pan Alley old-time numbers to popular British songs, to out-and-out pop pieces. His daughter later recalled in an interview how she remembered her father listening to everything and anything on the radio. She said, "The radio was the first thing that went on in the morning, and he would just sit and listen to a song one time and instantly pick it up and sing it all the way through." Puckett's life was cut short when he developed a pimple on his neck, which turned into a boil. He ignored medical attention and continued to work until he became very ill. A doctor eventually lanced the boil, but it was too late, as sepsis had already set in, and Riley Puckett died in the hospital on July 13th of 1946. So folks, that's all I got on Black-Eyed Susie. But I'll leave you all with one more recent version of the tune. While there are literally hundreds of amazing versions I thought about inserting here, I really love this one. It's by a fiddler with the name of Andrew Fitzgibbon. There's just something about his playing that is so touching and profound. He's a current-day musician, but somehow seems like he just stepped out of a different century. There's nothing super flashy here. He's not trying to impress us with some hot new fancy licks, but it's simply sublime, and I hope you enjoy this one as much as I do. Thanks for listening.